Okay, welcome. This is our annual ethical leadership event lecture. I'm Andrew Fiala, and I'm the director of Fresno State's Ethics Center. And I'm happy that we're doing this tonight. We'd scheduled it in the fall, and we had to reschedule, and so here we are. I'm really glad that we're here with Pastor Binion. I'd like to thank, as we get started, the Lyle Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Better Business Bureau, who are our partners in this project. And let me just say a couple words about the project, and then I'm going to introduce in a moment my department chair, Dr. Maldonado, and he'll introduce our speaker. So we started this idea of an ethical leadership lecture about 5 or 6 years ago. And the idea was to identify people in our community who are doing good things with integrity and who sort of we look up to as role models. And the whole idea, here we are at Fresno State, and this is Fresno State's Ethics Center sponsoring this. And the idea is that we learn about character and integrity and ethics by looking at good people and hearing from them about what it takes to do the right thing and to live a life of character and integrity. So we've had the good fortune over the last few years to celebrate a number of people from our community. And this year, as you know, we're honoring Pastor Paul Binion. Pastor Binion came to my class this morning and talked with students, and it was a really interesting dialogue with students about all kinds of issues, including everything from police brutality to community building and issues of concern here in our region. I first met Pastor Binion a couple of years ago. You may not remember this, but you spoke at one of our Interfaith Scholar events. And it was really an honor to meet you then. It's been an honor to work with you over the past couple of years following up on that. So that allows me to say, by the way, that one of the next events we are sponsoring through the Ethics Center is the Interfaith Scholar Weekend, which will happen on March 10th through 12th. And this year we're featuring Paul Rauschenbusch, who is the president of the National Interfaith Alliance. I'm going to put in the chat a link to that if you're interested in that and information on that event. I'll do that in just a moment. But now let me introduce Dr. Robert Maldonado. So Robert is our department chair, and I've known him got to be 15, 16 years, as long as I've been here. He was the chair when I arrived. I suffered through the process of being department chair, and then Robert became chair after that. Anyway, he's a good friend and a mentor, and he's an expert in text and interpretation of texts, and he's does a lot of work on the Bible, but he also does stuff on like J.R.R. Tolkien and other stuff. So anyway, he's a wise man and a good leader in our department. Dr. Maldonado, you can take it over and introduce Pastor Binion.
Thank you, Andy. Also want to remind you, did you want to say anything about Interfaith Scholar Weekend?
I did. I announced that briefly, and then I just put in the chat the link if people want to get more information about our Interfaith Scholar Weekend. And it looks like Dr. Maldonado froze up on us. Such is the life in Zoom land. We'll give him a second to see if his computer catches up with us.
I think. And I think, yes,
we lost him.
Oh my goodness.
We lost him, Pastor Binion. Let me take over and introduce you, because you're the main event here. So hopefully he'll join us again. I'm really sorry about that, folks, and I'm really sorry for Robert that he had to got bumped off somehow. Anyway, so introduction of Pastor Binion. Pastor Binion is pastor of the Westside Church of God, which is one of Fresno's largest African-American congregations. He has a degree from Cal State Los Angeles and a bachelor's degree from Fuller Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Divinity degree from Southern California School of Ministry. He's been in Fresno since 1977. And he's, I think in that time, eventually he's now a senior pastoral leader at the Westside Church of God. He was, a number of people were nominated for this award. There's so many outstanding people in our community. And one of the important things about Pastor Binion is that he's been a steady presence in this community for 30 or 40 years or more. He's worked on a number of projects, including increasing college preparation, trying to help African-American and low-income students come to college and succeed. He's worked with the Southwest Fresno Development Corporation, and Dr. Maldonado has rejoined us. Dr. Maldonado, just finishing up with the introduction of Pastor Binion. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, something just went kerblooey.
Yeah, let me just say one last bit of introduction. Maldonado, I'll turn it back over to you if there's anything you want to add, but.
Well, I don't know what you said, so.
Yeah, basically, I did want to point out that Pastor Binion worked with a number of leaders in our community, including Jerry Dyer, our mayor, who gave him the key to the city of Fresno. Dr. Maldonado, anything you want to pick up on? I know you didn't hear what I said.
I just want to add my voice, such as I can, to commend and welcome and thank Reverend Binion for the inspiring and good work that he does. And it's an honor to be here with and to hear this lecture today.
Thank you, Robert.
Welcome.
Pastor Binion, the time is yours.
Well, again, thank you so very much, and I'm grateful. I'm humbled. I'm honored at the recognition, the acknowledgement, that the award given to me for ethical leadership in our city. I've been here 45 years in Fresno. Fresno's home, and this is where I will be until I leave this world. Hopefully no time soon, but Fresno's home. And I'm grateful again I'm a product of God's grace and his mercy. And the privilege of serving is a part of my ethic, my personal ethic. Again, I appreciate the Ethical Leadership Award. I've done what I've been called to do. And it's good when people recognize it. But again, the award you gave me just kind of inspired me to try to do a little better, a little more. And but again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you on tonight. Appreciate those participants who've joined us for this time together. And Dr. Fiala, how might they submit their questions? Any questions? How might they submit those questions?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So as the audience knows, this is a webinar, and we won't see your faces, but we would like you to put questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep my eye on that. And Pastor Binion, if I see anything in there that needs to be brought to your attention, I'll make sure you know about that.
All right, thank you. I want us tonight to look at a particular letter from one of the icons for those of us who are in gospel ministry, but also an icon in the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., again, a very young man who was killed tragically, but few people in history, I believe, have contributed so much to their world and community and society as Dr. King has done in the few years in which he lived. I relate to him in several areas, being from the South myself, also being an African-American, also being a pastor and preacher. And so as you look for mentors, look for models, look for those who are examples of what you believe God would have you to be, Dr. King certainly filled that bill, as well as one not only as a pastor, but also his ethics with regard to injustice and battling unrighteousness, as I say. Again, he was a tremendous example to all of us. I shared earlier today, and again, I want to thank Dr. Fiala and Dr. Maldonado again for this great privilege. Dr. Fiala allowed me to be a speaker this morning at his class, and I enjoyed the young folks very, very much. They had questions, and I enjoyed the questions. But again, it was a great time. It was an energetic time for me as well, to be in a room full of young people who seemed excited, had questions. We had a great time together. And again, Dr. Fiala, thank you so very much for allowing me that privilege today. I want to today, as we consider ethics and leadership, to look again, in my opinion, one of the great models and examples of what ethical leadership should look like. And that is a person, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I would like us to look, and many of you have read this particular piece, his letter from a Birmingham jail. I know many of you have sure read it, and some of you have not. I'm going to tonight, in our time together, quote and read sections of the letter, because to me, in responding, the letter was written April 16, 1963, as Dr. King found himself incarcerated in a Birmingham jail. And Birmingham also happens to be my hometown as well. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. But he was incarcerated after leading some protests there in Birmingham. And several clergy in the city criticized and questioned his motivation and why he did what he did. And the letter, again, is a response to them. And as I read the letter, and again, I've read it so many times over the years, it lifts up for me his ethics. And I think we can see his ethics in leadership. To me, as we consider this man in the letter, he makes very clear his ethical position on racism and policing and violence and protesting and becoming involved in the struggle for justice and equality for all people. So I'm asking you tonight to allow me this afternoon to just kind of run through the letter and lift up some things, and then I'll gladly receive your questions. Again, the letter was it was handwritten from a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama. And I think that what he endeavored to do was lift up the moral responsibility that we as people have to break unjust laws and take direct action rather than wait potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. That's a point that he made to those who question him and in the letter. And also he made it very clear that argued that Black Americans have waited long enough for equal rights, and that's just unjust laws, again, to not be considered. And then I think as we look at the letter and that he wrote, it's quite obvious to me that again, that the protest would hopefully lead to negotiation with the authorities. And that time does not automatically bring about change, but also too, his Christianity commanded him to walk in behalf of the oppressed. And being also, again, myself, a Christian preacher, in that my ethics are based in the Bible. I'm not sure, Dr. Maldonado, of the academic definition for ethics, but ethics to me are just the principles by which I live and the principles that govern my life and my decisions. And so my basis is from the Bible, is from the Word of God. And again, which tells me how to live, how to treat people. But also the Bible is very clear in that we must and should prioritize equality and eradicating injustice. As we look at the letter here from Dr. King to the clergy in Birmingham, he begins by responding to them who said that these clergymen felt that the protests he led were unwise and untimely. And and then he goes on to say that I don't normally respond to criticism, and because I'm criticized all the time. But he goes on to compliment them by saying, "But I believe that you are men of good and goodwill, and that even as your criticisms, they're done from a heart that is pure. So I want to take the time. I want to take the time to respond to you." And he goes on to talk about the engaging in nonviolent action. And he said that he came to Birmingham by invitation. It wasn't that he was looking around the country and see where I can go and barge in and interfere, but he was there by invitation. And he wanted to make it very, very clear that he consented to come to lead this effort again for justice in Birmingham. He goes on to say that the city of Birmingham was filled with great, great injustice. And I can testify from living my early life in the city of Birmingham. And the reason why our family left the South was because of the injustice and the bigotry and hatred and the tremendous injustices in every institution, even the government that was set up to serve us. And my father made a decision, and my mother came kicking and screaming. He said, "We are leaving Birmingham." And we ended up in California. And I'm so glad that he did. But again, in making the case for why he was in Birmingham, Dr. King said, "I just cannot. I live in Atlanta, but I'm concerned about what happened in Birmingham." And one of the famous quotes that all of us have heard him make time and time again: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And so again, he was making the case here that he couldn't sit in Atlanta and not be concerned. Again, it's citing his ethics, that he could not stay in Atlanta and not be concerned about what is taking place in Birmingham or any place in the country where injustice was taking place. He said, "I have to show concern. I have to try endeavor to be a part of the solution." And he responded to those preachers by saying that I'm not coming here because I need a place to go. I was invited, but also I'm here out of great concern. He also, again, in emphasizing the nonviolent campaign, there were 4 basic things that they did. They collected facts. They negotiated. They would seek to negotiate. They did what was called self-purification. And then there was direct action. And he did this to let them know that they did not come to town and again go about the protest, as some would say, willy-nilly, but a great deal of thought, a great deal of investigation and study. Again, the collection of data was again a big part of their preparation as they again did this. And he made it very clear. We've gone through all these steps as we've come here. But he also said that as we examine Birmingham, Alabama, racial injustice engulfs this community. He went on to say that their study also revealed that Birmingham was probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States of America. He went on to talk about their ugly record of brutality, again, where the police were concerned, and that Black people experienced grossly unjust treatment, even in the courts. He went on to talk about the many the cases of the unsolved bombings of Black homes and even churches and that more than any other city in the nation, Birmingham again had a terrible record again. And so again, with all these conditions, he said that they had to seek a way to negotiate, and especially with the city fathers. And again, many of those efforts proved to be fruitless. Even again, ethics. Even in his ethics, there was protest with purpose, because one of the things they did was to talk with the economic leaders there in Birmingham, and through the course of negotiation, promises were made by the merchants to remove many of the racially humiliating signs they had in their stores. And on the basis of these promises made by the merchants and the economic community of Birmingham, they ceased their demonstrations. They agreed to a moratorium on the demonstrations. But as the months went by, the merchants there in Birmingham did not keep their word. And again, broken promises were made. Few of the things that they agreed upon, were actually done. The merchants there in Birmingham agreed to certain things. They did not follow up. That also again led to the demonstrations. But one of the things too is if we go back just a reference to the 4 points, the 4 steps that they would always follow when they're demonstrating, was a process of self-purification. And what it was really, that Dr. King and staff would take those who were going to work in the protest through a series of instruction and teaching and commitment, and remind them again of the philosophy of nonviolence, that we must be able to accept whatever retaliation comes our way, and we must make a commitment not to retaliate in violence. They talked about the difficulties, they talked about the challenges, they called it self-purification. And one of the questions that they would raise in the training, he said in the letter, will you be able to accept blows without retaliating? And would you be able to, again, endure the ordeal of going to jail? And so these are the questions, because again, Dr. King made it very clear that we're not going to be we're not going to resort to violence. We are not going to stoop to violence. And so we want to make sure that you will be able to, again, suffer whatever consequences you may have to in order to keep, again, our commitment to nonviolent action. And so, again, as he talked about the purpose of their direct action, again, they were hoping through their actions to open the doors to negotiation. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted to sit down with the powers that be. They wanted to speak to government and to police and education. They wanted, again, to tear down the walls. And so he made it very clear that we're not here trying to start trouble. We're here to negotiate in behalf of our people who we feel have been neglected and overlooked. And so again, he went on to say in the letter that we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, but it must be demanded by the oppressed. And he went on to say in the letter, for years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Black person with piercing familiarity. The wait has simply always meant never. And we must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And so he was making the case, again, an ethical statement to the pastors there in the city, that we can't wait any longer. We must act now. He went on to say that we have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. And we have felt the stinging darts of segregation. We have seen vicious mobs lynch our mothers and fathers at will. We have seen our brothers and sisters drowned at whims. We have seen hate-filled policemen curse and kick and kill our brothers and sisters. We have seen the vast majority of the 20 million Black brothers and sisters smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the United States of America in the midst of all the affluence. And it goes on here even to get personal, that when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has been advertised on TV, and to see the tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to Black children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. Again, he says there, his son asked him, "Daddy, why do white people hate us? Why are they so mean?" And then he makes a statement which I rarely relate to, about when we were in the South and we'd go visit our I say kinfolk, y'all say relatives, but our kinfolk. Restaurants were not open to us. Motels would not receive us. And I can remember my mama frying chicken and baking pound cakes. Oh, we ate well. But Daddy would drive for a while and stop. He would rest and drive for a while and stop. He would rest and eat. And we did that because, again, we were not allowed access to the hotels and restaurants and motels. And so he goes on to remind the clergy of that. And so he goes on again, further on, and again, so much is here in this letter that I think I'll stop shortly. Are there any questions that have come, Dr. Fowler? Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Binion. So I would encourage folks in the audience, if you have questions or comments, you can post them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep my eye on that. Pastor Binion, let me start off.
Please.
I mean, the part about self-purification that you talked about, and what I think part of that has to include courage.
Oh gosh,
because one of the things we think about, from ethics side of things, what kind of virtues are there? What about courage, and how how important is that in either in living a good life and doing the right thing, and especially if you're on the receiving end of oppression and you're trying to push back? What do you think about?
Well, again, later on in the letter, Dr. King addresses that. Again, the self-purification was again like an indoctrination and training for them to prepare them what they may face in protesting. But again, later on in the letter, he goes on to say that this is not for the light of heart. It takes courage to do what we're doing. Because for many of us, we're risking our lives. For many of us, the stories even in my hometown of people that my folks, my parents knew, when their employers who were white saw them in protesting, then they lost their jobs. That many of our fellow citizens lost their employment when their employers saw them being a part of what they called this something you should not be a part of. And so it took great courage. And that is why, again, the Dr. King and others of the movement, the pastors, spend time in prayer to build up the strength and to build up the people internally and mentally and emotionally to endure what they had to go through. Because again, many of the citizens, like I said, they didn't lose their lives, but they lost employment. They lost their income because they marched and they sought to change their lives. And so courage, Dr. Fiala, was, my God, with a capital C. Again, but again, what took place, I can recall even in growing up, that many were quite reticent, many were quite reserved. But again, something happened. And again, as Dr. King made so very clear in the point he was trying to make to the preachers, we can't wait any longer. We can't wait any longer. You're saying wait, but we're thinking never. And so Dr. King would even further on the letter, he talked about some letters that he had received from citizens around the country and saying, you're doing too much and you're risking too much, just take some time and, take it to the courts. Well, the courts were not friendly to us at those times. And they were a great part of the problem. I shared earlier with the young people about a couple of our relatives were murdered and killed, but no justice was ever done. The police department never again sought to find out those who perpetrated murders against relatives of our family. And so again, as Dr. King and the people decided enough is enough. And again, for many of us, even my father, why we left the South, why we left our home, was because my dad said, no, I am not going to raise, and I'm oldest of 5 children in the South. I'm the oldest of 5 children. My dad said, and my dad was college educated. I say, and my mom and dad were brilliant folks. And mama should have gone to University of Alabama, but they wouldn't have allowed her to come back in the 1930s. My dad should have went to University of Mississippi, but they were not allowing, Black folk to go to, they went to HBCUs, historical Black college universities. But my dad heard that Los Angeles was a place for a Black man to go. So we moved to Los Angeles. And God blessed my dad tremendously in employment. He was the first African-American in many companies to be in management, so on and so forth. But he says, the South, no, we're leaving. And again, mama came kicking and screaming, but because with her is what she knew. And our relatives were there, but dad said no. And so again, courage, but even then, it was courage. My leaving the South was courage, took courage. But again, you're right, doctor.
I hear that for even, young people going off to college. That, I mean, it's a step, when you have to have a bit of audacity, right?
Yes.
To be willing to take that step and leave the nest. And
yes.
Hey, we got a couple questions.
Certainly.
Yeah. So Ian asks, what about protests that are violent? And the worry is that Ian is suggesting that there's a worry that there's a kind of stereotype that, as he says, the violent black man minority rioter.
Yeah, yeah.
And is this something that was a worry back in the civil rights movement? And what do you think about that today in terms of social protests and the worry about violence?
Yeah, well, again, regretfully, there are those who have resorted to violence. And again, if you study, if you read, if you're aware, cognizant, there are those who've written a great deal about protesting. And what violence does, it just breeds more violence. And those who choose to protest that way, you bring in, we've seen it, the police, the National Guard, and violence breeds more violence. Again, Dr. King, understanding this, said it would be better for us to endure what we have to suffer, because if we resort to violence to seek for solutions to our issues, again, we'll lose. We'll lose. Again, violence is not the way. Again, the ethics of Dr. King, again, the Bible, which again, I also subscribe to, that is not the way to get it done. And violence breeds violence. And they even, for example, it comes to mind, I was very disturbed. The George Floyd incident, regretfully, in Minneapolis, as many of the protesters were protesting, they burned down Black businesses. They burned down ethnic businesses. So you're protesting an action of the police, but look at what you do. You destroy the livelihoods of those you say that you want to help and that you're protesting for. So again, even, as Dr. King set the example, all of the protests that they did across the South were well planned. They weren't just reactions to situations. They came together, they planned, they negotiated, they prepared, they prayed because they were Christians. And that is why, again, even met with great opposition and violence, you see the changes that took place in the laws and in many of our cities. And I'm happy to say that many years ago, I went back home to Birmingham, and it was a different place. It was a different place. Not perfect, but again, a much different place than the city I left when I was a young boy. And thank God for that.
Pastor Binion,
yeah,
there's a question I think that it connects to what you were just saying about prayer and the work of the clergy.
Yes.
This is from Matt Gendian, who is a professor on campus in sociology.
Hello, Dr. Gendian. Hello.
And Professor Gendian says, it's such a pleasure to hear from you today and hear your analysis of MLK's letter. He wonders why some of those Christian pastors publicly rebuked him. Yeah. Professor Gendian says, are they not reading the same Bible? Are they not trained in the same Christian ethics and theology? Why would those Christian leaders be so critical of MLK and the movement?
Because the reality is they were scared. They were scared. They were afraid. In many cases, afraid of their own folks. You read the letter that Dr. King wrote from jail. He really is very, very critical of the white church. Very critical. Does not hold back in expressing his disappointment in white Christians. And making it known that he expected more in the way of support, more in the way of understanding. And in many cases, the white church was some of his major opposition and major hindrances they provided when, again, they were in a position to be of great support. In my opinion, Dr. Gendian, it was fear that even the white pastors that wrote and made it known to Dr. King, they thought that he was unwise and that he was not. I believe they did it out of fear of their own parishioners who would say to the pastor, we don't agree with this. We don't go along with this. And you better not as well. And I'd not be surprised if some of those white pastors had their parishioners who came to them and said, you better say something to this man King, or you're gonna be in trouble. And understanding how some of our churches operate, where the powers that be in the church direct the pastor. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have gone here, but I was asked, you asked me the question. I said that those white pastors and the white church, in objecting to Dr. King, was because they didn't agree, was because they objected, was because there's another way, it was not a priority. They would recognize injustice, but they're saying, well, what are you in a hurry for? 340 years of oppression, 340 years at that time. At that time, Dr. King said enough is enough. But also, too, in my opinion, those white pastors bowed to pressures from their parishioners and maybe other community people. You better come out and object to what Dr. King is doing. It was fear.
You know, this is I mean, such an important thing for leadership, isn't it? That, you know, the leader of a community can't be afraid of the people he's leading, right? I mean, or needs to overcome that fear and find the courage to speak truth to the people that he leads, don't you think?
Oh, well, yes. And quite frankly, again, being a man of the word of God, that's the responsibility of a leader, to lead, to set the pace, to set the tempo, to make a vision, to again, if you're a pastor, then you need to make known the ethics that you have in the house. Again, for me, when I see my Bible, particularly the Old Testament, speak specifically to coming against injustice and inequity, to welcome immigrants is what the Bible says, to embrace even immigrants, and to give ourselves to helping the poor and aiding the widows and children and those who are in need. That is a part of our responsibility. And really the way the Bible is, again, in my interpretation, is really not a choice we have, but a directive that we have as Christians, again, to come alongside those in need, to be a voice for justice and fairness, to take a stand against inequity and racism in our case, to, again, to hold the police accountable, to hold our public leaders accountable. That is a part of our, in my opinion, Christian responsibility. And again, a leader cannot take his directions from those he leads. A leader is to set a vision and lead the people to where they need to go. That's not the reality in many situations. But again, a leader who is taking his directions from his followers is not a leader at all.
Dr. Gendian added a point about that, saying that that's the opposite of leadership.
Yes, sir.
You know, the leader needs to be fearless instead of fear mongering.
Yes.
There's another interesting question that'll take us in a different direction, I think. So Jim Grant, my friend who helps with the Interfaith Alliance, who leads the Interfaith Alliance, Jim Grant says, if Dr. King were alive today, what would his ethical leadership look like? What would he be protesting against? What would he be demanding from Congress, the courts, and the president? What would he organize us and want us to do?
Can I put it this way, Brother Jim? God bless you, brother. Thank you for tuning in. He would be no different than what he was doing then. He would be the one. His actions, his activity, again, he would speak to nonviolence, he would speak to negotiation, but again, he would be a voice, and a voice against injustice, probably even more so today with the media and with technology. His voice and his face and voice would even be more so heard around the world because of, again, our access to technology. But again, the violence that took place with the murder of the young man in Memphis, Dr. King, again, would be a voice. You recall he was living, war. He was criticized. He was criticized because he came out and spoke against war. He was called un-American because he says we should not be in this unjust war. And so he again would be he'd be a prophetic voice. He'd be a prophetic voice doing just what he did when he was alive. Speaking out, being a voice, being a thorn in the sides in the day of many of our politicians, many of our government leaders. But again, it'd be very, his leadership would be very widespread. I think he would be even more so, again, as far as emphasizing education with our young people, economic development in our communities. It would be a broad brush that he would use to exercise his influence and authority.
Let me go back. There's something in the chat. One of the first comment from Mitchell, who Mitchell says, what has motivated you and encouraged you in addition to the Bible and Dr. King? Is where else? And I guess this question is, useful for students too, who, Birmingham, Alabama is far away from Fresno and long ago for students who are 20 to 25 years old. Where else can they look for inspiration and models of character and virtue and leadership?
Well, again, I'm a reader, books. I always got books. In fact, I'm a real slow reader. And then I read 3 or 4 books at a time, Let me tell you, appreciate Mitchell's question. I have intentionally befriended. I've intentionally been a mentee. I have purposefully sought relationships with people who I thought would help me to become all that God would have me to be. And again, across the board, all of them are not Christian. Some are Jews. Some are Muslims. Friendships who have given me a perspective. Let me tell you, since you asked the question, it was Rabbi Rick at Temple Beth Israel who gave me my understanding of shalom in the Old Testament. Shalom. I've been to seminary, so what? But that friend of mine gave me an understanding about what shalom means. But he's a Jew, so he's my friend. Intentionally, with leaders and even people in the community, even some of our veterans in our community, who many folks would think, oh, well, they haven't been to college and they don't have college degrees, and they're just no. They have wisdom, and I am one whose cup is always open to wisdom. And I find it even in listening to our children. I find it. And so in response to the question, oh yes, it's the individuals who I have befriended and the relationships that I have prioritized that have added so much to my life. into my understanding, into my perspective, and listening to the hearts of people and the people have helped to motivate me in so many areas of my life. Thanks for that question, Mitchell.
I love how you said that the more or less the cup of wisdom can't be overfilled.
No, no. Oh, Lord, no.
I love that. That's philosophers, we're all about the pursuit of wisdom. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful quote. There's another question here.
Yeah.
And this I think is related to probably to Dr. King, but the question is, sure, what does hope mean to you? And I guess like if we could fill in a couple details, I mean, young people today, there's a sense of hopelessness that
yes, there is.
all this climate change and we still have racial tensions now 400 years later, and we haven't solved these problems, and there's violence, and what are the resources, and what do you hope for, and how do you get hope?
Well, let me say what has to happen is people like myself who are in positions of leadership and those with influence, we have to keep hope alive in our folks. Parents with children. And you, Dr. Maldonado, Dr. Fiala, those of you who are in education institutions, Dr. Jindian, and others, you have a great responsibility because you are encountering students from all over the state, maybe the country, from every kind of environment, every kind of situation. Many of them come from homes that are not strong and stable. And there they are sitting in your class, listening to you 2 or 3 times a week. And I think that we have to be purveyors, if that's the right word, of hope. Hope to me is a better day is coming. Hope to me says I cannot give up. Hope says to me I have to keep striving and keep trying. Hope says to me that I cannot be consumed in how things appear, but I must strive to make things better. We all know this, but do we do it? And see, I am always a half glass. How you say a half glass?
Glass half full.
Yeah. I am the eternal optimist. A better day is coming. Keep at it. You can't quit. Learn the lessons. I was telling one of our young people. Now learn the lessons of being broken, poor, and poverty, and not having any money. Learn those lessons well, because the day will come when you will have a checking account and a couple of extra bucks. So, with me, even with people who are sick, even in my own home congregation, we have individuals who are very, very ill. All we can do is say, look, we're praying, we're believing, we're with you, we're standing, and we're trusting God. Take your medication, do your treatments, but don't give up. And again, I think, as I said, that those of us in positions of authority and responsibility and leadership, that is part of our task. That is part of our task. To keep, some call it faith, but to let people know you can't stop, you can't give up. And we're believing. And like one of my seniors told me the other day, she says, I may not live to see it, but I'm believing it for my children. I'm leaving my children. That there'll come a time when the bigotry and the hatred, they will not have to contend with, as I've had to all of my life.
Pastor Binion, thank you. There's a number of questions and comments popping up, and a lot of them just saying thank you very much.
Well.
We have like just a few minutes to go. And one question I think that is maybe useful, especially for students again, from Letitia, who says, how do you encourage your congregation at Westside Church of God to engage in social justice work? I think, and I think the bigger question, what can young people do to get
Yeah.
involved in the community and the work
Mhm.
that you're doing, and and get engaged in hopeful ethical practices?
Yeah. I think what has to happen too is you have to be conviction. It has to be something that you will commit yourself to for the long term, not just for the season. I think also too there are many levels, as I've shared all the time. All of us are not going to march. All of us are not going to carry signs. All of us are not going to go and walk the streets and protest and and all of that. But I say this though, Doctor, and to Letitia, that we all must take responsibility. That wherever we are, wherever arena, wherever sphere of influence, whatever our circle is, we must take responsibility to make sure that equity and justice exists there. In your family, in your home, in your neighborhood, in your social circle, in your fraternity and sorority, you must become an agent of justice and equity and fairness and what is I call righteousness. And the way to get involved is to get involved. To get involved. To start, you may have an hour or two a week. Don't try to, jump in and do more than you can do. But there's so many agencies and so many outreaches and so many ministries. And I believe that if your life is just totally all about you, then you're missing out on a great deal. You need to make sure that you have a portion of your life, a portion of your week that is spent helping those who, again, where you will not receive anything from it, when you're trying to help make someone else's life better and more fulfilling. Again, I charge all of us to make sure we're volunteering, we are giving ourselves to others in the various arenas through our churches, through organizations, through other ministries, at schools. Every principal, for example, in West Fresno, every principal in West Fresno will say to me when I see them, I always say, hey, can you guys use some volunteers? Yes, yes. You ought to see them. Yes. Do you have anybody that can just come and read to kids? You have somebody just take an hour a week and come and help. I mean, and that's a great place. But again, the thing is, start doing something. Stop talking about it. My grandson, I have a grandson that says, Papa, stop talking about it. Let's be about it. Yeah.
Wise advice. Wise advice. Pastor Binion, I think that we're about to run out of time. And there is, again, people posting in the chat. Thank you to you. And
No, I'm grateful, Dr. Fiala, Dr. Maldonado. Thank you. You've honored me. You've honored me today by allowing me to do this. And for all those who tuned in, bless you all. Appreciate you. Love you. And again, I'm going to continue to do what I do and try to get better at it and try to involve more in it and trying to make this community in our city everything that we want it to be. God bless you all.
thank you. Thank you very, very much.